go carry your matter for head, yo. I go there by your side. Good evening. Welcome to the Intentional Parenting Chat. We're coming to you a bit later today because I was caught up with visiting a family that lost a child. And so tonight on the show, we want to talk about how to raise emotionally balanced and wholesome children. In the light of the recent teenage suicides, it's becoming worrisome, it's heartbreaking, and it's not something that we're going to sweep under the carpet. We can't be too safe. Even if we're parenting our children right, they're still going to mix with other children, and so you need to be constantly honing your skill as a parent, constantly learning how to connect with your children, and constantly raising your game to be more competent in raising a balanced child. And so let's look at what are the possible causes of suicide. Why would a teenager take his or her life? A lot of people have asked me this question, and I like to share some of my findings on what could be the possible causes. And after that, I will share with you what we need to do as parents to raise emotionally balanced children. And so one of the reasons why people commit suicide is when they are depressed. Now, depression is when it has reached the height of it. A lot of other factors could have led to it, but at this stage of depression, it's characterized with emptiness. It's characterized with extreme sadness, and the person gets to a state of despondency. And sometimes we get depressed one time or the other, but it is when it's now becoming long-lasting, when it's now becoming extreme, that they just give up on life and decide to end it. And so as a parent, you need to be emotionally intelligent. You need to be very observant. You need to know how to connect with your children such that you would notice when your child is going into this extreme level of sadness. That could be one of the reasons. Another reason is when this teenage years is characterized with a lot of crisis, identity crisis, a lot of trying to understand themselves, a lot of trying to, find a place in society, a lot of trying to integrate themselves into, when at a teenage age, the child is not really a child and is not really an adult. So in between that, I'm not a child and I'm getting into adulthood, it's usually characterized with a lot of identity crisis. And when the child gets extremely confused at this stage with a lot of things that the child is struggling with a lot of things the child does not understand, if this child does not have adequate trustworthy support, if the child does not have a support system, an adult support system that can help him go through these periods of confusion, that could also lead the child to want to end it all. That could also make the child not want to continue anymore. Another thing that could cause for a child to likely get suicidal or even have a successful attempt at suicide is when there's an overdose of substance abuse. Sometimes because they do not have effective coping mechanisms, sometimes because they are in this time in their lives where there are a lot of things they are going through, especially if the child maybe has lost a loved one, maybe has lost a parent, maybe is going through some struggle in the life to try to understand this phase of the life. Sometimes they take to drugs. Sometimes they take to drugs even due to negative peer pressure. And so when they have an overdose of such drugs, it could lead them to now, get high and they don't know what next to do. That could also be one of the things that makes a teenager go suicidal. Another thing that could make a teenager go suicidal or even commit suicide is inability to handle frustrations, inability to cope with disappointment, inability to cope with even very strict and harsh parenting. Because sometimes we must understand that some ways that we handle them in these delicate times can push them to things they don't want to do, maybe the loss of a loved one or disappointments. And so life will always throw challenges at them. And if they've not been taught how to cope with change, they've not been taught how to handle disappointments, they've not been taught how to cope with emotions, they could lead to suicide. And as a parent, you want to know, what do you need to do? One of the children who committed suicide suffered from the loss of a loved one, and then the parents were not, the surviving parent was not understanding probably how to handle his or her own exposure to this sudden loss of a loved one, and then coupling it with having to deal with a child who is not understanding it well. So how do you as a parent prepare your children? You need to know that once you have a child, you are committing yourself to an 18 to 21 years project, and you need to intentionally begin to teach your children some life skills. You don't have to wait for your child to become a teenager. You don't have to wait for your child to suffer any major heartbreak before you begin to teach these life skills. And what are the life skills that I'm talking about? You need to not just prepare, some parents will now go dramatic and now say, oh, come, let me teach you. I'm hearing that children your age are committing suicide and all of that. I want to teach you. No, you don't have to go that route. You need to incorporate it into your daily parenting styles. And I'll share a few things that you need to teach your child so that your child can be emotionally balanced and whole. Number one is teach your child self-love. Teach your child how to love herself, how to love himself. Because yes, I understand that there are some people that are predisposed to depression, predisposed to such emotional traumas, and I'll share some of those predisposing factors with you shortly. But you must teach your children self-love. Teach them to appreciate themselves for who they are. Teach them to be who they are. One of the challenges that teenagers face is poor body image. Yes, it's either I'm too fat, or my nose is too big, or I'm not as slim as the trending style. But you need to teach your children to love themselves for who they are, appreciate themselves with the flaws and all that, because that is what makes them unique. And you need to model it even as a parent. Number two, you need to validate your children. Validate them and let your children know that you love them. Appreciate them. Celebrate them. Let them feel whole in themselves. When there's something they do right, give them a thumbs up. When they don't do it so right, don't be always quick to judge them. Don't be always quick to condemn them. Let them feel a sense of self-worth. Help them to grow their self-worth. Help them to appreciate themselves. Okay? The third thing you need to do as a parent is to teach your children to be resilient. Increasingly, I'm seeing a lot of teenagers who do not have that fighting spirit, who are not tough, who cannot suffer long. You need to teach them how to be resilient. And how can you do it? There are a couple of ways you can do it. Help your child develop mental resilience by engaging them in mentally stimulating game. I'll share an experience I had with my children recently. So we were playing the cash flow game for children. The cash flow game is a financial intelligence game that helps to teach children basic financial intelligence, okay? And so when we were playing that game, you needed to get your passive income to be more than your expenses for you to leave the rat race, all right? And so we're doing this, and a particular daughter of mine was not leaving the rat race. In fact, at a point she gave up, that she wasn't playing anymore. But I didn't have that. I couldn't take that. I made her sit down. I explained to her how if you keep running away from issues, you will confront them later. And so if there's something you're not doing right, concentrate on the game and try to take the lessons. We need to teach our children, mental resilience. You need to teach your children physical resilience. Is your child engaging in a sport? Is your child playing an instrument and all of that? And what is their staying power? Do they easily give up on things? And how do you as a parent model them to be tough? You need to, make them tough. Let them stand up to what they need to do. And there are skills for you to do that. So teach your children resilience. Help them to be tough. Don't let them buckle under pressure. That is one skill that children need to learn to be emotionally balanced. The next one you need to do is that you need to allow your children to solve problems. Allow them create solutions for themselves. You know something? I see a lot of parents who are always ready to give them all the answers. You don't have to provide all the answers. Sometimes when they ask something of you, and even if you know the answer, lead them to the answer. Allow them go do research. Allow them go find the answer for themselves. Don't always be quick to provide every answer for them. Let them be able to problem solve. Let them be able to, think, do critical thinking. Let them be able to find solutions for themselves, and then be a guide for them at times where you need to be a guide for them. Next thing you need to teach your children, and that will be number one, teach them self-love. Number 2, validate them and make them feel loved. Number 3, build your trustworthiness. If a child is confused, if a child is depressed, if a child is struggling with anything, that child is not going to tell you just because you are a parent. The fact that you gave birth to them does not necessarily qualify you to be a trusted friend. You need to build your trustworthiness. You earn it. Trust is earned. So you have to build your trustworthiness so that your child will be able to trust you and share their struggles with you. Have there been times when they share struggles with you in the past and you shut them off, or you made it look like it was nothing, or you laughed over it? You could have shut that child up, and the child may not be able to open up to you anymore. So to build emotionally balanced children, you need to build your trustworthiness, earn their trust so that they can trust you with their life challenges, with their questions, no matter how stupid they are. The next one is number 6. Make it okay for your children to fail. Make it okay for your children to fail. A lot of times when our children do mistakes, are you quick to correct them? Are you quick to shout at them? They will get scared of failing. But you and I understand that failure is part of life. For you to have transcended to become the adult that you are, I guess that you have your baggages of failures. So you need to exercise patience. Let your children know that it's okay to fail. Because some of the things that drive children to suicide is when they can't handle disappointment, when they can't handle heartbreaks, when they can't handle a sudden change, when they can't handle frustration. But if as a parent you've taught your children that failure is a way of life, in fact failure is feedback, failure is research and development, your child will be able to cope with failure better. Number 7, teach your child how to bring out the beauty from every failure. So it's not enough that you teach your child that it's okay to fail. The failure is useless if you don't draw lessons from it. So you need to teach your children how to draw lessons from their failures. For every time that they fail in a thing, they should harvest the lessons from it. You teach them to harvest the lessons. And there are 3 fundamental things that they should do for every lesson. Every lesson should be positive. From every failure, they should draw a positive lesson from it. From every failure, number 2, they should draw a lesson for themselves. Okay, not just for anybody, a lesson for themselves. For every failure, they should draw a lesson for the future. That's what I call the three things: for themselves, for the future, and a positive lesson. All right. So if you teach them that, when they fail, they already know that, man, failure is a way of life. I can end my life. Remember, you're already teaching the child self-love. So the child knows that he has a high self-worth of himself. And so when he fails, he will take the learnings and try to discuss it with you because he has earned your trust. Then next thing you need to do is to teach them emotional intelligence. Those children are at a point where they are trying to understand themselves. They are trying to interpret the world. They are perceiving things differently, and it can be a bit confusing. As an adult, cast your mind back to when you were younger. How did you feel during that transition period from teenage to adulthood? You found it challenging? I, for one, I had a case of negative body image, and it dealt severe blows on my self-esteem. So I can identify with young people when they are struggling to be themselves, when they are struggling to understand what they're going through. So you need to teach them emotional intelligence. You need to teach your children how to identify their emotions, how to name the emotions, and how to manage the emotions. Because many times when these emotions are not managed well, they can take to drugs, they can become depressed, and if they don't find a listening ear that they can listen to, they don't know how to handle it. So that are the tips that I have to share with you today. But in all of this, you need to develop strategies and systems on how to ensure that your children guard their minds with all diligence. Let me tell you, you need to be conscious of what your children consistently behold. You need to be conscious of what they consistently hear, what they consistently listen to, what they consistently watch. I hear there is this game, I'm trying to remember the name now. If I remember it, I'll share it as a comment. A game that children that they watch on the internet now, and that game tells them to do one crazy thing or the other that culminates into attempting suicide. And some have said that from some people that attempted suicide, it was through that game that they did it. So who does your children give their ears to? What do they listen to? What do you continually speak into their life? You need to be very intentional about that, and you need to be prayerful as well. Guard the heart of your children with all diligence. But one habit that I developed, and if you are faith-based and you want to also use that, it could work well for you. I speak truth into my children. I affirm them. Right now, even after this show, I will go to their bedrooms, I'll put my hands upon them, and I'll bless them. And so in the mornings, I try as much as possible to also bless them, to also speak life into them, and I teach them to speak life unto themselves. So those are part of the tips that you can quickly begin to make use of in everything that you do with your children. Please let love lead you. Whatever you're doing with your children should be based on love. I'm not in that school of thought that feels you need to be harsh, you need to be strong and all of that with your children. While I understand that you need to discipline them, while I understand that you need to create boundaries, I also know that love is the magic. Love does the magic. When your child understands that you love him or her, he will be open to you. He will share his struggles with you. He will come to you. And all of this, when you keep doing this and you begin to notice a strain in your relationship with your child, or you begin to notice that your once bubbly child has changed, or that there's a change in the personality of your child, or you can't connect or reach the child, don't just sweep it under the carpet. Address it immediately. Try to get to the root of this change. Try to find out what is currently happening in the life of this young child. Some of them get bullied in school, and because they don't want to appear weak, or they don't want to look like they don't know how to handle their peers, they hide it. And please, if you are a parent, I hear a lot of parents do this when their children are engaged in a fight in school or in the neighborhood, and they come home crying. Some parents will say, go back there and go and fight. How can you be crying because you fought with your peer? You don't need to do that. At that point where your child is broken, you need to gather that child up and give the child the succor. Because if you keep chasing the child away from you, where will the child go to? The child will fall into the hands of people who will give him different advices, different recommendations, different from what you are feeding the child at home. So at this point, you need to be intentional about your parenting. The alarming rate of teenage suicide is worrisome. It is heartbreaking. But if you commit to raising emotionally balanced and wholesome children, your case will be different. On Saturday on the show, because time will not permit me, we will talk of the different different factors that could dispose a child to depression and possibly getting suicidal. There are some factors as well. On the Saturday show as well, I'll be inviting one of my friends who is a therapist to also be with me on the show, where we share what you can do to ensure that your children are emotionally balanced. This is the Intentional Parenting Chat. I am excited to come your way this evening. If you learned something and you want to help another parent raise emotionally balanced and wholesome children, please click on the share button and share it with as many people as possible, because we must stop teenage suicide, we must rescue our children back, and we must commit to intentionally raising wholesome and happy children. I remain dinma, your host on the show, and it's a pleasure to have you. Join me again at 8 p.m. on Saturday when we continue our discussion on how to raise emotionally balanced and wholesome children. Thank you everyone for your feedback. Nora, I can see you. Okay, Nora says wonderful point. Well done. Thank you, Nora. Josephine says failures are feedback. That's awesome. And every one of you, thanks for joining me on the show. Please share with your friends and keep a date with me on Saturday at 8 p.m. Good night.